David, we are so excited to have you on today in the Healthy Way series. We cannot think of a more perfect person to come and talk to us about parenting.
I'm honored to be here. You all are kind to invite me.
Okay, you've got a Southern twang, and I just need to know where you are in the world. Where's that coming from?
I do have a thick Southern thing going on. I grew up in Tennessee. I've actually lived in Tennessee my whole life. I grew up in a little town south of Nashville, and then Nashville is now what I call home, has been for over the last 25 years.
Great. And who do you live with there?
I live here with my wife. We have been married for almost 25 years. She is a saint. And I have 3 children. My oldest is a girl. And then about a year into her life, we got pregnant for the second time around. And we were so grateful, incredibly grateful, and went for our ultrasound midway through, as you do, and said to the ultrasound tech, okay, we're really old school. We know we have all this modern technology, but we don't want to know what we're having. We know my daughter was a girl till the day she was born. And she agreed. And I can still remember vividly where I was standing in that moment as they were scanning my wife's belly. And she looked up with this huge smile and said, I see 2 heads. And I remember thinking, why are you smiling if the baby has 2 heads? About that. Nothing about that sounded right to me. We were genuinely that shocked. We have no history of multiples in my family. My wife had not gained extra weight. Her counts weren't different. So none of the indicators that you always get when you're carrying multiples were there for us. So I said to the technician, well, we are clearly so behind at this point. Why don't you go ahead and tell us what we're having? And she said 2 boys. So
Aww.
We're still recovering from that news 16 years later. So I have twin sons, some daughter and twin sons. They're awesome kids. I'm so thankful for them. And then we were just talking before we started recording the podcast that I'm a dog lover too. And we have a yellow lab. So I don't want to leave that guy out. He's actually here napping. I don't know if you can see him over my shoulder. He's napping over here in my office. He's an official therapy dog. So he comes to work with me every day, which I love.
How did you train him as a therapy dog?
It's a pretty extensive process. It really is. He goes to school for the better part of a year. You start out with puppy school and then get your good citizen. And then it's kind of a progression until you earn what is the equivalent of a PhD. We were laughing. He really does legitimately have more letters behind his name than I do. So it's very humbling that your dog's better educated than you are. But he's a fun guy. We actually have 5 full-time therapy dogs who are part of our practice. So we love working with dogs as a part of the work we do with kids and families. It's amazing.
I love it. Well, David, we're here really to tap into your expertise on parenting. And I know this is, you deal in this every single day. And we're looking at what really is healthy parenting. So maybe let's start with, what are some themes that you see coming into your office over and over and over again when it comes to parenting?
I would say a recent theme I'm seeing more. It's certainly been a part of my work for as long as I've been doing this work. And I've been doing this work for over 20 years now, but it's more prevalent at this point than at any other time, is anxiety. And you all probably have read, anxiety is now considered to be a childhood epidemic in our country. We have the highest numbers we've ever had. And we have the youngest children being diagnosed with an anxiety disorder than at any other time in history. In fact, when we did the research for our newest book, the research we did 3 years ago, at that point, 1 in 8 girls would be diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. And just 3 years later, the statistics have already shifted to 1 in 4, which is mind-blowing to me that it could have jumped that much in that short a period of time. And so I would say that's one of the more common themes that I see coming through my door, alongside a lot of things that we have always seen, but again, at greater rates. Anxiety and depression are both at a peak point, which is heartbreaking to me to see that many kids, and again, that many children that young, who are struggling. And it's beyond just, some exaggerated worry or some intense sadness, but it's crippling, debilitating worry and sadness that a lot of kids and adolescents are experiencing. And so it's a part of where I'm such a fan of what you all are doing. And when we can come together and have conversations around what are things that we could be doing on the front side just to bolster the kids we love, to, strengthen resilience in them. And so, again, I mean that. I'm genuinely grateful that you all would invite me into this conversation of just proactive things we can be doing as parents.
What do you think is the cause of the increase? And I will say, I think, I have 4 daughters, that I have a daughter who has struggled with anxiety, and we haven't totally known the cause of it. So I just want moms to hear too, that this is something that we struggle with in our household. What do you see just big picture as the cause, and then maybe some common micro examples of what leads kids towards that level of anxiety?
That's a great question. I would say, a number of times we can, if we trace back, we follow the crumbs and we trace backwards, can put our finger on an event or an experience or a season or a loss that would have ignited that excessive worry that gave way to some anxiety. And then at times we just can't. And I think that's understandably frustrating, sometimes maddening, I think, for us as parents, when we can't pinpoint it or really circle around a specific understanding. But I do believe, and the research would support this, that some kids just bend a little more in that direction. I think we all, honestly, as people, bend in different directions. Think about the more common categories of some of us are a little more half empty, glass half empty, some more glass half full. Some of us bend toward extroversion, some towards introversion. And so I do think, in response to your question, that some kids do just bend a little more toward fear and worry. And then if there is a particular event or experience or loss, it really can ignite that and accelerate things to the point where, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, it can become crippling or debilitating. But I would also say, in response to that, and this is going to sound like bad news to moms who are listening, but I hope it really can be good news, that there are some contributing factors that are more within our control. I mean, we obviously acknowledge there's circumstances in our lives and our kids' lives that are outside of our control. But there are some things that are. And one of those contributing factors that research would say is anxiety in parents. So I think I often will say to parents, if you yourself, when I sit with 2 parents, if one or both of you have struggled with anxiety, you are in many ways overqualified to take this journey with your child, because you know what it's like to live in that skin. You know what it feels like when your brain gets hijacked and begins convincing you of irrational thoughts and distortions and things that aren't real but feel very real. And so that, again, sounds like bad news. Oh my goodness, I passed it down, I gave it to them. Oftentimes when parents hear that, but I want them to be encouraged in the sense of, you're equipped to take this journey, but paying attention to that and knowing that we want to keep our anxiety in check, our worry in check, our coping skills well-oiled to the point that our kids are having an opportunity to see that. Because interestingly enough, we were just talking about my dog. When I was training this dog, I will never forget the instructor saying, this is honestly some of the best parenting advice I've ever heard, but it came from a dog trainer. He was talking about when you take that first visit into your setting, when you walk into the children's hospital, he said, you will understandably feel anxious. It's your first time. You don't know how the dog's going to perform, but you want to be so in check with what's going on with you, because anxiety travels down the leash. And I will never forget him saying that. Anxiety travels down the leash. And I think that's true for children. I think they can absorb and experience and carry our anxiety in ways that accelerate that fear. So I would say that would be another contributing factor. And then a third I'd mention that is a part of what I think is more within our control is overscheduling. And, we are parenting at a time in history that I think is different than any other time. I mean, there have always been hurdles in every decade, every century of parenting, but some that are unique to this time that I experienced myself as a parent, and I certainly hurt with parents when I sit with them too, of, think about even the age-old phrase of kindergarten is the new first grade. Mm-hmm. If we look back at curriculums 50 years ago, we are currently doing with kindergartners what we were doing with first graders at that time. So we're asking 5- and 6-year-old children to do first grade level work, and then it just keeps on. I mean, my twins are sophomores. My daughter's is a senior, and they began taking classes in 7th and 8th grade that I took in high school. So it just keeps on going. You know, my daughter as a senior is taking AP level courses that I took as a sophomore in college. So
yeah.
Everything academically has been fast forwarded, everything athletically. I mean, when I was growing up as a student athlete, there was not a sport that you did year round. And now almost every sport you can do year round. You can do travel sport on the weekend. You could have 4 practices a week and then play 5 games on a weekend. And so every arena of our kids' lives has been so accelerated in a way that I think they're overscheduled, oftentimes overstimulated. There is a fascinating amount of research around the loss of sleep that kids and adolescents are experiencing that is contributing to a lot of things like anxiety and depression. And, you know, for all the things that have changed, that is a very clear example of children today, 10-year-old kids today need the exact same amount of sleep that 10-year-olds needed 100 years ago. Infants need the same sleep, adolescents need the same sleep, but they're not getting that. So their brains don't have time to recover. Their brains don't have opportunities for rest and to send things to long-term memory in ways that ours did uniquely, that was a part of our overall health, our physical health, our emotional health, our social and spiritual health. And those are just a handful of things. You all can tell I feel really passionate. I could keep going and going. That was a very long answer to your question. Forgive me, but it's a part of where there are a lot of contributing factors. But I do love to camp out in that space of what are some things that are within our control.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really helpful. And as far as overstimulation, that's an interesting idea. Like sleep, we think, okay, our kids need more sleep. That feels very concrete. But as far as overstimulating kids who maybe do have busy schedules, how do we create space as parents to understimulate, or I don't know, to counteract that?
Yes. I think one key way is with downtime. And I don't think it's ever been harder to offer up downtime to our kids. I think partly because they aren't as well resourced emotionally a lot of times as many of us were growing up. And I know that's a generalization, but to say the majority of us, and you all forgive me because you are clearly younger than I am, so don't forgive me that I'm grouping you into my age bracket. But when I was growing up, we obviously just didn't have access to a lot of technology that we have. We didn't have access to a lot of things. So I grew up in a small town. We lived in a safe neighborhood. And, you know, I was one of those kids that my mom would send me out at 3:00 and say, I'll see you at dinner time. And I was shooting hoops with friends and jumping on trampolines and, you know, doing whatever we did, playing kickball in the yard. And there was this lack of stimulation because it was a lot of face-to-face interaction and brainstorming about what we're going to do, and something as simple as playing a game of kickball in ways that kids don't have time to navigate downtime and boredom and become resourceful in ways that I think are a part of what you're asking. I think the other is that animal of technology. And you know, we don't have as much data in at this point as I'll be excited for us to have 20 years from now, but we have enough in. We have done enough research. We've activated kids' brains and watched what takes place when they interact for extended periods of time with technology, whether that's gaming, whether that's social media, many of the different formats, to know that we can overactivate, overstimulate the brain easily in those places as well. And we can begin to trigger some things like attention deficits. We can begin to trigger some things like excessive worry, intense sadness. So certainly that's one of, I think, I was about to say the easiest ways, but it's not easy to manage technology. Nothing about that monster is easy, but a way that we can step in and begin to monitor that limits the amount of overstimulation happening with the brain. So I would say if moms didn't hear me say anything else in response to that question, I would say if you prioritize sleep and offer up some really good downtime and limit technology, right there, you're knocking it out of the park. Those are 3 immediate ways that I think every one of us could begin to step in. And I get excited, you know, thinking about the holidays being right here upon us, and kids are going to be out of school, and we are going to have more downtime with our kids than we do when they're, you know, in their academic environment 35 hours a week. And I just want to challenge parents to do some of those old school things like play cards, play board games, drive around town and look at light, Christmas light, just those things that I think are other practical ways that are kind of right here in front of us this time of year.
It's interesting because I went on a walk with a friend the other day, and she was telling me that her son was explaining to her, my son and I have a mutual accountability where he sets the time limits on my phone for social apps and whatnot, and I set the limits on his phone. And her son was saying, Mom, this is what the Gilberts do. And I actually think that would be really helpful for me. And so what I think that shows is that kids actually are also aware of their own unhealth. And they also are saying, oh man, this is a little out of control and I need help with this. And so we're seeing it, but and also the other thing I was thinking about when you were talking was that traveling down the leash concept. Our habits with technology travel down the leash, right? So to really check our own as well.
You're so right. I mean, talk about what the research is telling us. Research is telling us time and time again that kids learn more from observation than information. They're learning way more from watching us than hearing from us. And I can't tell you how often I will hear adolescents in my office say things like, I had a 15-year-old boy who's driving with his mom a lot because he's got his permit now. And he said, my mom is on me all the time about not picking up my phone and checking text when I'm, driving or even at a red light. He said, I see her doing it all the time when we're at red light. And so it's those moments where they're paying attention, they're absorbing that. Or I had a kid say, my dad is all over us about, not having more FaceTime together as a family. And I saw him texting under the table at dinner the other night. And so they are noticing these things where, as you shared, we're not modeling good limits in ways that are so helpful and so needed. And I love that you had that conversation with your son. And I challenge parents with adolescents, talk about those things. Like, what are you hearing friends say is helping them when they feel like they're spending too much time on Instagram? Whatever that question might look like. Or, hey, I had a friend tell me this. What would you think if we, not you, but we decided to test drive this for a while? I love the new screen time feature within the iOS update where I encourage a lot of families, talk about that. What was your number this week? and using that as a springboard for setting some parameters around technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just think that's so helpful. Okay, I have another question, and that is, parents often feel that their kids are missing out if they don't stay on the treadmill, if they don't stay on the club sport treadmill, if they don't do all the things that they think their child needs to do to get into a good college. And so this concept that you mentioned about everything's accelerated, we as parents often get that anxiety over our children not keeping up. So how do we address that in ourselves and then turn that around and help our kids?
I think you're so right. And I think that's where it starts, of assessing that anxiety. And what does it mean for me? And what does it look like that I would choose not to step into that race? And I think every parent is going to make a decision unique to their family and their circumstances. But I have an assignment, for example, that I will oftentimes give families. I call it a family experiment. I love things that families can do together and engage and involve kids in it. And it's super simple. I'll give you the Cliff Notes version, but it's a time activity assessment where you sit down together. You could do this on a Saturday morning. All it takes is 4 sheets of paper and a pencil. That's it. And you could do this with kids who couldn't even write. You could be the reporter, but just say, okay, let's brainstorm together as a family. What are all the things we do in a given week? So it's like, you go to work, I go to school, gymnastics, basketball, church, whatever it may be. And then on a second piece of paper, you say, all right, let's make a list of everything we wish we did more. And everybody gets to offer something up. There's not a right or wrong answer, just different ideas. And kids might say, I wish we went to a water park. I wish we camped out. Parents might say, I wish we volunteered more. I wish we did more community service. But again, just make a list there. And then on the third sheet of paper, I have families write a family mission statement. And I love to have families do this because, I think every organization, every school, every church has a mission statement, some couple of sentences or paragraph that just defines who you are. It may include your core values, a family scripture, but just thinking through, what are we about? as a family. And then what you do is you hold up that first list of all things you do up against that family mission statement. You hold up the list of all the things we wish we did more against it, and you see how do they work together or against each other. And then on the fourth sheet of paper, and you could do this over, one Saturday morning, or you could spread it out over a couple of weeks. On the fourth sheet, you get a do-over. And just think, okay, what do we want to do different? In light of who we want to be and in light of all the things we do, what do we want to do different? And I have been fascinated to give this experiment to families and to see what they come back with. And I had a family come back and they made this decision together, not the parents making it for the kids, but they took it a step further and not only listed what they did, but they put an hour amount to what they did. And that was a game-changing moment for them because they didn't realize, and this family decided they were going to be done with travel sports because they had never really sat down and calculated how many hours a week they were spending in practice or games. And so they together decided once this season ends next year, we're only doing school sports or rec sports. And that was a way for them as a family to get off the treadmill. And that can feel scary. I mean, I'll use that example. I can vividly remember as a father myself, my sons, I think were in fourth grade, and a dad approached me on the soccer field after a game and said, have you thought about doing some travel soccer with them? And I said, I certainly have thought of it. I know a lot of people do, but I just don't think that's going to work for our family. And hear me say, for any parent listening, I'm not knocking travel sports. I mean, it's an amazing context for community and skill building and developing in a lot of areas. I'm just using this as an example for this question, but I said, we just decided that's not going to work well for our family. And I remember him looking at me and saying, you realize if you don't, your boys are not going to play high school soccer. They won't make the team. And I remember first feeling really offended, like, you don't know that. You don't have any idea how it's all going to play out. And then walking away from that conversation and saying, and he might be right. Mm-hmm. And what I said to him in the moment is, that may be so. And that's a sacrifice that we are willing to make. We are, because if the only option is we've got to be, in St. Louis on a weekend, one of us in a hotel room here, one of us in another place here, then the cost of that feels too great for us, not for other families, but for us. And here we are at that moment, at that point. And I absolutely would say, I'm not going to put a Disney ending on that story, but I'd absolutely say, I think, it's affected their amount of playing time they would get on the field. And you can certainly tell the kids who've been playing year round at this point, but I do not regret that decision for a minute. And we even had a really rich conversation in a family meeting with my kids at one point and said, I told them that story and said, you all were too young to even remember this, but Mom and I made this decision and we don't regret it. And they looked at me and said, we don't either. Mm-hmm. Which not every kid would respond in that way. Some would say, I do, or I wish I could get more playing time, whatever it may be. But that is but one example of, that was a place where we decided we're not going to get in that race. Like, that's not for us. That works for other people. That doesn't work for us. I think a lot of parents are going to make that academically of, we're not going to get on the AP track. Like, that's not a direction we're going to go. Plenty of people have gone through high school, graduated with a diploma, gone to college, had incredibly successful lives who never took an AP class. They didn't even exist at one point. So I think defining where's that arena is going to be for you as a family, and then being willing to say, we're going to put a flag in the ground here. Mm-hmm. And I also think it's helpful. I think this is a helpful practice, even with technology, of being in community with at least one or two other families that you feel like are moving in the same direction. You may not be making identical decisions, but some similar decisions. So that, in adolescent, every teenager in some moments can say, you're the only parent who won't let me fill in the blank. You're the only parent who checks text or my history or whatever it may be. I think it's great when kids say, when they hear us say things like, I have a feeling there really are a lot of parents who don't check internet history. But I know for a fact that the Jones and the Smiths do. We talk about it a lot, and we believe it's a good practice. Not that we owe it to our children to justify those decisions, but I think it allows us to lock arms with some other families who are moving in a similar direction, and that we can bounce things off of and use as a sounding board. So I do think that's important as you're making those decisions or deciding we're not going to get on this particular treadmill or enter into this race, that you have some folks who you feel like are joining you in those decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, That's good. And I use that all the time. Well, I know that Krista does.
Love it. Good.
They know that Krista's
Yes.
strict, but it is good to have other families that they know, and they know it's true when you say that.
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
Probably right, Mom. They probably do that. How do you balance, I think, these boundaries with the sense that your child may be gifted in a certain area or has a passion for something? You know, we as parents are wanting to help our children discover how God has uniquely made them. And that's part of our goal as parents. So how do we flex when we have multiple children around, you know, we are going to dedicate maybe more time as a family or more resources to something because a child loves this. Like we have some family, one of their daughters loves horses. Well, that's not a super cheap hobby, right? But it's something that they have developed as a family to be involved in the horse world. So how do we discern that, I think, as parents?
That's a great question. I do think that kids notice when, for a long period of time, not for a season or a year, for a limited period of time, that we devote more resources to, or time, or travel, say, with an extracurricular experience to one child. And I'm quick to say on the front side of this question, I do think it's great when kids grow up with an awareness that life is not fair. In certain pockets of development, kids are going to have a heightened sense of fairness, and they're going to want everything to feel fair. And, I think it's partly our job to convince them that fair is actually a place with cotton candy and funnel cake that I like to go a lot, but it's not life. And so I don't think it's our job to make everything fair. Hear me say that as a disclaimer on the front side. I do think, and I love your word, it is our job to make sure it feels balanced, and that a lot of their life feels balanced, whether it's making sure we're balancing sleep and extracurricular opportunities in school, or we're balancing how much time we spend doing this kid's activity with this. And I think it's great when our kids will hear us say, like, we're going to devote more time, or we're going to be traveling for this, but putting an end point on it for this year. And then we'll reevaluate and see where we are at that point, so that they don't have a sense, even if it is a particular child who has a unique gifting. I think there is something useful, and this is going to sound controversial, I think, to some parents listening, but I think it's useful when we limit some of that for the sake of helping them understand what it means to be a part of a family. I think that trumps that in my mind. I want that to be the first and top priority, that we don't sacrifice all people or all resources or all, however we fill in the blank, over an extended period. We might do that for a season, but we don't do that long term for one person at the sacrifice of everybody else. And sadly, I see a lot of parents doing that on behalf of kids and sacrificing their marriage. And that's heartbreaking for me. And I don't think that's healthy or helpful for kids. I'm heartbroken when I hear parents say things like, we haven't been on a date in over 5 years. I think that not only hurts their marriage, I think it hurts their children, because we're missing an opportunity to teach them something so valuable about the sacredness of marriage and commitment and all those things. So that's where I want us. I love that you asked the question the way you did, to be about the balance of, are we balancing all those things? And we throw out that word a lot. In fact, we posted something recently on our social media that we can't take credit for. I wish I could, but Dan Siegel and Tina Bryson wrote an amazing book years ago called The Whole Brain Child that I love. And then they have a follow-up book called The Yes Brain. And it is some of the best Brain 101 education that I would love for every family to be doing with their kids. And they have within the Yes Brain book what they call the Healthy Mind Platter. It's an experiment families could do where you're really assessing each individual in a family. How am I doing with balancing some of the things we've been talking about? Sleep, exercise, reading, all these different parts. And so you have these categories, and you can kind of do a checkup from time to time as a family of, how am I doing with my Healthy Mind Platter? Oh, I'm kind of tanking in this one area. I need to step up this particular part of my life. So I do think there's something so valuable about families having some moments where they do a checkup and see how they're doing in balance, with balance.
It's great. And it requires a lot of communication. So what does that look like in your home? I'd love to hear what your communication lines, or just even what your maybe regular patterns are for that.
I am a real advocate of family meetings. I love those. And for any parents listening, I'd highly recommend, if it's something you've never done, I don't think it's ever too late. We started way later than I would have liked to. It's one of those things where I can't tell you the number of amazing things I recommend to other families that in my work that I forget to do myself a lot. And this would be one of those, but we picked it up nonetheless. And one of the things I coach families in, and we do, is make it time limited. I think the whole idea of a family meeting, particularly if you have teenage boys, they're going to think, oh, so much talking. No, please. And so I think it's great for it to be time limited. So ours are a max of 45 minutes. And if I were working with a family with elementary age children, I would start with 30 minutes and make it really basic. And so part of the communication piece for us is that we have some rules of engagement that are part of our time that we came up with together, not rules that I passed down, but I said, let's brainstorm about what feels important to all of us. Is the very first time we ever did it. And one of those is that everybody shares something. And so in that time, part of everybody sharing something to allow us to communicate as a family is that we have kind of three categories. Ours are gratitude, concern, and then practices. Those are our three, and it could be anything. But we start out there, and everybody's got to write down just what are three things in the past week that you have been grateful for, and then we share those. And we talk, what are three things you're carrying right now? Things you're worried about, things you're anxious about, things you're concerned about, and we're carrying those with each other. And then practice, what's something that we want to do different, either as an individual or as a family this week. And that might be, the healthy mind platter. Like this week, I got to up my sleep. Or, one of my kids might say, I violated my rule of not having my device with me the hour before I went to bed. And I'm only going to read during that time. So it's a great window that we use to check in, communicate with each other, each take our own temperature, take the temperature of the family. But I think it's a great practice. And even as we're talking about this larger conversation of just healthy practices for families, the fact that we're knocking on a brand new year, I'd encourage families to think about rolling that out in 2019. Sit down with your kids and say, here's something we're going to test drive for 2019, and make it fun too. I don't want it to feel so structured that it's not about connection and relationship. So I encourage families, when they're introducing the concept, that on the front or the back side, you just do something fun. So maybe you make homemade pizzas on the front side, then do the family meeting, or maybe you have a family meeting and then make hot fudge sundaes, or you watch a movie together, or you play a board game, or you go for a walk, or go out to eat, go to a movie, anything that could be about connection and relationship, so that kids experience with this, kids experience with this process feels relational. It feels about connection and enjoyment first, and communication second.
So good. Thank you, David. It's just so practical and helpful. I love it. Okay, I've got a question about resilience. So we all want our kids to be resilient. And so a part of that includes them learning how to overcome hard situations and to lean into challenges. And we also know that there's some very real things, especially now culturally, that are dangerous for our kids, and our kids get in over their heads easily. And we're seeing the suicide rate jump at an unprecedented rate. And so that's very real. And, we think, okay, in those cases, intervention needed to happen because the child was not able to deal on their own. Where is that line? I think it's one of the hardest things to discern as a modern day parent.
I agree. I think balancing support is one of the trickiest parts of parenting. And I think that's true with kids as young as toddlers all the way through young adults. And so I would say, when in doubt, well, let me say this first as a rule of engagement. I would say first rule would be, I'm never going to be an advocate for putting a child in danger. So if we feel like we're in that space, if we even question that we're in that space, then I will never encourage a parent to violate that rule. So say it was a kid who is threatening suicide. I'm not gonna just circle around that and wonder if they're being dramatic or not. Like, I'm going to take it very seriously because thousands of kids do in our culture. So if it involves danger, all rules are off at that point. If it just involves struggle, I think there's some wisdom to letting kids, because I think it's the only arena where kids really do develop the muscle of resilience. And so if it's just struggle, I'm a real advocate of an equation that we really believe in that we call empathy and questions. And I practice it myself on a daily, sometimes hourly basis with my own kids. And so if they're reporting something hard to me, I think what's most instinctive for us as parents is to step in with a lot of coaching and instruction. And I think we rob kids of the opportunity to develop resourcefulness and resilience. Secondly, I think what we do in those moments is we don't honor their intelligence. You know, when we immediately step in, if our daughter comes home, has had a really hard experience with a friend, and we immediately step in, you know what? You just need to tell her she's not the boss of you. You walk right back up to her tomorrow and you tell her she can't. If we immediately move in with that kind of instruction and coaching, I think whether we're aware of it or not, we're sending a message to the girls we love, like, you aren't smart, you aren't brave, you aren't resourceful enough. So let me not only tell you what to do, let me tell you what to say when you do it. And I just think it doesn't honor the amazing ways that God made them and their intelligence and their bravery. So I love starting with empathy. Sweetheart, that sounds hard. I can't imagine what that was like when she said that to you in front of other people. And then moving toward questions. What do you want to do with that? What do you want to say to her? How do you want to handle that? And being available if our kids are stuck and they don't know, or if they want to use us as a sounding board, or, you know, say they throw out an idea and maybe we're thinking that doesn't sound like such a great idea, or I can think of a better way to do that. I would go with their idea. I'd say, all right, let's test drive that. I'll be her and you be you. And then we'll flip roles, and you could make it a little more complicated in ways that you think it could go down that she hasn't thought through yet. But role play has been proven to be a useful practice for kids and adolescents because it's an experiential tool, as opposed to just coaching them and giving them the information that might not all land on them. But if they actually practice the exchange and think about how many situations that could apply to, if our sons come home and say, I don't feel like I'm getting the kind of playing time I want on the field. All right, what do you want to do with that? I'll be your coach and you be you. Let's practice you asking what you need to work on to get more playtime. So I think so many of these moments in our kids' lives, role playing, approaching a teacher and asking for extra credit. So whatever the arena of struggle may be, I think empathy and questions is a winning posture.
It's really great. And I've heard that with substances as well, that role playing those times where they may be faced with something, that role playing how they'd respond is really concrete and helpful, because in that moment they can only think in the concrete brain, is what I've heard, and correct me if I'm wrong. And so to do something concrete in a role play is really important. It
is. In fact, can I tell you what I think is a brilliant strategy that a 15-year-old I was with this week came up with? I'm with a kid, and he's a freshman in high school, and he has gone to a couple of parties, not surprising, where kids have been drinking. And he said, David, sometimes I'm okay with not being there, and sometimes I want to go, but I don't want to be a part of it. And empathy and questions, buddy, that sounds hard. What do you want to do? Have you thought through any ideas that might work? And he said, I'm thinking about this. I'm thinking about taking a red Solo cup to the party with me. And I'm going to have Sprite in it when I walk in the door, and no one will ever know. And I said, okay, I think that's brilliant, because I do think that's brilliant.
Yeah.
One, that he came up with it himself. Two, that for him, it's a way of saying, sometimes I don't want to go at all. And then sometimes I want to be at this place, but I don't want to participate. I don't want to be a part of it. And ideally as parents, we could all say, well, I don't want him to be at a party with alcohol ever. And I would say in response to that, I'm not sure that a person could go to college in this day and age and make it from point A to point B without that happening. So I even said that to this young man. I said, buddy, I love that. And I think you're going to be able to implement that strategy your freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior year of college too. Like, I think that's just plain brilliant.
And when you're 44.
And when you're 44, there you go. Absolutely. So yeah, doing that role play experience, test driving that, I think is a great way to honor kids' intelligence and resourcefulness and bravery and throwing the ball in their court.
My guess is that our instinct to jump in and tell kids what to do and not go to the empathy and questions is because we want it fixed. We want to fix it. And so I'm thinking of a conversation I had with my 9-year-old last night about a conversation I thought she needed to have with her teacher. And I probably did put in that, well, you just need to talk to her because she's your teacher and that's what teachers are for. Opinion, rather than really empathizing with her that the homework was hard and she didn't understand it. So how young can you go with this? Because it seems like even my 7-year-old would respond well to empathy and questions.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. I honestly, going back to that example of girls and relationships, I don't think a girl has to be much older than 4 years of age before she's going to have her first encounter with a mean girl. She's going to figure out there is a queen bee, a mean girl, on every playground, in every school, in every city, in every state across the country. So I think girls developing early that skill set of how to navigate the complicated maze of girl relationships is something we want to be role playing with them from early on. And I think about how many 4 and 5-year-old girls will have that experience of, you know, Molly told me I can't play with her and the other girls on the playground. And you're right. When we hear evidence, it stirs a lot inside of us. And what is most instinctive is, I want to do some problem solving right now. And we're reacting more out of our own emotions sometimes than our kids' emotion, which is kind of back to that keeping ourselves in check piece. So yes, I believe in that practice for kids as young as toddler, elementary age, all the way through young adulthood as something that has value. And then I think we can start it early on.
Okay, so David, I'm going to ask a 2-part question, but it's kind of the same question. It's both sides of the coin on it. And that is, what are a couple of ways that we hurt our children without knowing it? And we may cover some of the ground that we've already covered, and then the flip side is, what are a couple of the biggest gifts we can give our children as parents in how we're parenting? So let's just start with maybe the negative and then move to the positive.
I would say one of the first ways that I think we can hurt the kids we love without being aware is, I believe, for as long as I have been doing this work, that, and this is going to be hard to hear, I think, for parents listening, but stay with me. I believe that in every family, there is at least one child who pushes your buttons a little more than the others, one who flips your switch a little bit faster. And often that is the oldest child of your same gender, or it's the child who's the most like you.
Wow.
And with the oldest child of your same gender, I think that kid can feel like an extension of who you are. And with the kid who's most like you, I think we see evidence of those things in them that we don't like about ourselves. And it's like we believe, oh, I want to work that out of you. I don't want you. It's often from a great place. Like, I don't want you to struggle in some of the same ways I did. And what happens in both of those situations is, I think we end up parenting that kid harder than the others. And I think that's hurtful to them. And so my challenge would be to every parent listening, I think we all know who that kid is. You know, I just say, in fact, when I say that out loud, when we teach classes, parents start laughing immediately, because like everybody knows who the one kid is who flips your switch a little bit more. And I think it starts there, know it, and then know that, one, I cannot parent that out of them. That's not A, a possibility, or B, my calling. And then that kid is an extension of me. It's unfair for me to ask them, you know, that I'm living out myself through them in some way. So I think it starts with that awareness, so that I'm paying attention to that I'm not harder on them, drilling down on them more. And then I would say, secondly, a place where I think we can be too hard on kids is out of the very place. I love that you all asked the question you did, because I do want us to be thinking about where we're doing too much problem solving. I want us to be thinking in general about where we're just doing too much talking. In fact, research would say the 2 biggest mistakes that parents make with discipline is too much talk and too much emotion. Those are the 2 most common traps we can step into. So if you can tell your emotional temperature is climbing, you're emotionally charged, I would use that as an opportunity to step out, disengage right then, and say that, you know what, I'm feeling a lot of feelings right now. I feel really frustrated. I'm going to go take the dog for a walk for 15 minutes, and then we will circle back in half an hour. And so that is such great modeling. I love when kids get to see and hear their parents doing that and modeling. This is what it looks like to have emotions as an adult and to have coping skills so that I know what to do, so that I don't end up being more reactive than responsive in my parenting. So I'd say those are maybe two of the biggest ways that I think we can harm kids without being, aware that we're doing it. I would say two of the most helpful things that I think parents can do. I think one is saying, I'm sorry. I know a lot of adults who didn't grow up with a parent or either parent who ever apologized. And the reality is we are fallible people and we're going to make mistakes in all of our relationships. And so I think there's something so healthy and wonderful when, say, we do blow it. That example, I'm parenting, I'm disciplining. When we parent in those emotionally charged moments is when we almost always make mistakes. It's like what happens when I go to the grocery store on an empty stomach. I just buy pints and pints of Ben and Jerry's, things I don't need. And it's when we say things like, you're grounded for life.
Yeah,
right.
Like we have to go back and like, okay, I'm sorry, you're not grounded for life. I was reacting. I had a dad who told me recently, he's like, David, you will not believe what I said to my 10-year-old son. And I'm like, I promise you I've heard everything. You can say anything. He goes, no, I guarantee you haven't heard this. He's like, I was so furious. I told him to get off the Xbox 3 times and he didn't. And I came in the room and I yelled, I'm going to set the Xbox on fire.
How many parents want to do that with Fortnite?
Yes, all of us. Yes. And so I love it, but it's in those moments when we make mistakes. And so going back and saying, buddy, I'm sorry. I was out of my mind in that moment. I'm not going to set your Xbox on fire. I'm not going to throw the Xbox off the top story of the house, whatever we may have said. And so I think apologizing when we blow it is good. And then I think secondly is even back to that example of modeling for kids. Our newest book, Are My Kids on Track, is on 4 emotional, 4 social, and 4 spiritual milestones we want to see kids progressing toward. And we will talk at the very beginning of the emotional milestones about that reality I spoke to earlier. Kids learn more from observation than information. And one of the greatest gifts we can give to our kids in terms of their emotional development is to model what does it look like to have feelings and to know what to do with it. And we even challenge parents, put a note card on your bathroom mirror with your top 5 coping skills: going for a walk, practicing deep breathing, doing some yoga, whatever it may be. It's different for every person, so that your kids can walk by your bathroom from time to time and see evidence of that's what it looks like to be a grown-up, and need reminders so that I don't go off the deep end, as we all can do in any given moment. So I think that's one of the greatest gifts we can give kids. And I think it even brings us back to where we started with talking about anxiety and depression. I just don't think enough kids and adolescents in this world get to see what it looks like for an adult to have an emotional vocabulary and to have resourcefulness, to have the gift of knowing how to navigate strong emotions. And I think it's a part of why so many of the statistics we're seeing, it's without a doubt in my mind why adolescent substance abuse is at an all-time high. I think, adolescent substance abuse, adolescent pornography, we could run down a list of all these different ways that kids are going and trying to shut down or numb whatever it is that they're experiencing because they can't work it through. And so I think that's one of the greatest gifts we can give them.
I love that. Thank you, David. Those are so
Thank
helpful.
you.
I would also, our last question. We want our kids to thrive, but what if they're not? What does a parent do? Where do you start and where do you go?
I love using the word stuck with kids. I use that word all the time in this office because that's not a permanent state of being. Any of us can get stuck and we can get unstuck. And I think we all get stuck in certain ways. Going back to how we've been, some people get stuck in negativity. Some people can get stuck in worry. And so brainstorming with kids, again, that empathy and questions of what do you think it might look like to get unstuck? What are some ways we could come up with and practice together, those kinds of things. If that's not enough, and sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't, I'm a real advocate of doing a check-in first as parents, maybe with a pediatrician, or we do a lot of what we call parent consultations here at Daystar. It's like a well visit with a pediatrician office where parents don't come in with kids, but we do these long distance by phone, and with folks in Nashville who come here to our office. And it's just a chance to sit down and say, okay, here are a couple of things that we're wrestling with or have been wrestling with for an extended period of time. Do you have any thoughts on some things we could try or do different? And so I think that's maybe a second step. And then trying those things out with your child, guidance from a professional. And then the third step would be if we're still stuck and they're not thriving, then I'm such an advocate of parking kids in front of a pediatrician or parking kids in front of a child or adolescent specialist, someone who has a background in development who could help them. And I think sometimes it's just that other voice. I say so often to parents, sometimes I'm not only saying similar things to what you're saying to kids, I'm saying the exact same things you're saying. It just sounds different because I'm not their dad. And I have certainly seen that in the lives of my own kids. Other adults, trusted adults, can get away with saying things different than I can because it's a different voice. And sometimes that's all that's needed to help get unstuck.
Wow. I just feel like this interview has been one gold nugget after another. And I am so excited for parents to hear this because this truly is one of the most sacred and hardest things we do, right, in this life. And we need help. So thank you, David. Thank you for the work you do and the books you put out. And I want to make sure that we do point people to your website and resources because they can just get more of this and more of you. So tell people where they can find you.
You can find all of our resources on raisingboysandgirls.com. And that will link you to our blog. It will link you to our books. It'll link you to our podcast. And we've got a page, depending on where you live, we've got a page where we're going to be speaking and what topics we'll be talking around. And so we'd love to get to meet you all if we're coming to your city. And if we're not coming to your city, we'd love to come to your city. So everything is housed under that umbrella of raisingboysandgirls.com. And thank you all for having me. I loved this conversation and thank you for what you're doing. This is so life-giving and I'm so honored you all would invite me to be a part of it. So thank you.
Well, thank you, David. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.